It's that time of the year as we end the preseason. The more important list is out, the watch list from the Senior Bowl. We're going to give initial reaction to a couple of guys that you want to check out, and maybe one of the most unique stories of a pair of brothers playing in this league in a long time and what it means today. A Locked On NFL Draft.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of the Locked On NFL Draft Show. I'm your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Eric Crocker. And of course, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Tracy from Locked On Chiefs and Rogue Analytics. And we got Rob Rain with us on this Thursday show. You can follow him on Twitter at Rob Rain. Follow Ryan Tracy on Twitter at Ryan Tracy NFL, and of course you can follow me on Twitter as well at Eric_Crocker for some of the other things we have going on pertaining to football. We want to thank you for making us your first listen of the day, and also let you know that the guys over at Brightco Jury, they're making the jury insurance very easy for your engagement ring, your watch, or whatever you freaking have. All right, it's easy, and you can get covered in as little as 2 minutes on your cell phone. You won't find a better deal on coverage that's affordable. Go to bright.co/locked on. All right, y'all. Let's talk about the Senior Bowl. And it's interesting because Nagy has done a terrific job with just the entire production of the Senior Bowl. He's kind of really made it a huge event. They've had a lot of access to members of the media. All three of us were there this past January, right? Keeping tabs on everything that was going on pertaining to the Senior Bowl and being able to see it there live and kind of rub shoulders with some of the scouts and et cetera. All right, so fun times, but now the list is out and you see a huge discrepancy between some of these schools, some of the powerhouses, and then maybe some of the guys that aren't, non-Power 5 conferences. So what were some of the things that you noticed, Rob?
Well, I think the first thing is that, the national champion, national title defending Georgia Bulldogs had 6 players on this list, and among them being the quarterback Stetson Bennett. At the same time, we saw Alabama have double that with 12 players on the list, which is the most of any team. And you'd expect that. I mean, Jim Nagy is a very intelligent man. Not only is he taking full advantage of all the talent that Nick Saban has collected in Tuscaloosa, of course, Alabama, with the Senior Bowl being in Mobile, Alabama, as you mentioned, that's going to be a huge draw as well. So I just thought that was interesting. Definitely going to stay in the powerhouse. LSU has 11 teams or 11 players as well. But then just kind of looking around the entire landscape, to me, that was one of the interesting things. I think like the Cincinnati Bearcats, for example, to me, they're one of the most fascinating stories a year ago. Obviously, they wound up, breaking the so-called Power 5, FBS and all that kind of stuff, and playing in the playing in the playoffs. Excuse me, easy for me to say here. But at the same time, we saw 6 players that were invited to the Senior Bowl from Cincinnati. That was a league high a year ago. And so I thought it was interesting to see 8 more players invited to the Senior Bowl this year, at least on I shouldn't say invited to the Senior Bowl, excuse me, but on the initial watch list. 8 players. I think that just what Luke Fickell is building there is absolutely remarkable. 2 of those players are in the secondary again. So everybody who thought that was Sauce Gardner and Kobe Bryant, taking out Brian Cook, taking off a year ago to the NFL, all 3 of them performing well with their respective franchises. You still have the nickel corner Arquan Bush, the safety Javon Hicks. They're on that list. You have the quarterback returning Ben Bryant. He was previously at Cincinnati, transferred for a year to Eastern Michigan, comes back again. So to me, that's the coolest thing about what Jim Nagy has done here. And you're right, Croc. I mean, Nagy's done a fantastic job. I mean, I'm old enough, and maybe Ryan can testify to this as well. I don't know, but I'm old enough to remember that, there used to be like magazines that would come out that would basically advertise different things that you might be able to buy for Christmas or for whatever. Now I guess it's just like Prime Days on Amazon. You can just see whatever you want. But when the Senior Bowl releases its watch list. I mean, that's almost like a Christmas day kind of looking through the magazine to see the different presents under the proverbial draft tree. And so it's an exciting day from an NFL draft perspective in a lot of different ways. When the Senior Bowl announces this list, as with the other All-Star games, announce their respective lists as well.
I have no recollection of being that old, Senator. But I know exactly what you mean. There's always the draft mags that come out too, and it is very much unwrapping. I think Ben is one of like the most intriguing stories in the era of the transfer portal. Like, this is stuff, back when those magazines came out. It's like, okay, so he's going to redshirt, and you're not going to see him for a year. Yeah. And now it's, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to come right back. And hey, you built a nice program. I'm here to be your quarterback. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how a lot of guys are moving around. And I was wondering, like, how would this Senior Bowl be able to keep tabs on that, right? I mean, you have a lot of movement at the quarterback position and all kind of other guys. And looking at this Senior Bowl watch list, there are a few guys that we will be talking about next that actually started at one school, went to another school, and another guy who actually went to another school. All right, we're going to touch on some of those guys and more next. But first, we want to talk to you about our good friends over at Brightco. All right, and listen, guys, we all hate insurance, right? But it's really good for us, and it's really beneficial when it comes to having jewelry, and that's where Brightco comes in hand. All right, now listen, my wife, and I'm pretty sure a lot of y'all have been through this as well, she lost a diamond in her ring, right? She has one of those rings, and then there's like a bunch of little diamonds and a bigger one or whatnot. She picked it out, not me. All right, but she got this diamond ring, and she lost the stone. I'm like, well, what the heck? What are we going to do now? And fortunately for people, there's Brightco, and that's going to help you. I've seen some videos of people losing an engagement ring when they go to propose. That's the last thing you want to happen when something that's supposed to be such a joyous and monumental moment for you and your significant other, all right? So the place for you to go is definitely Brightco, all right? It's so easy to really sign up for this. It actually takes just 2 minutes on your cell phone to check it out. You go to brightco.com/locked on. You're going to find everything that you need to really protect not just you, but one of the most important assets. Again, go to bright.co/locked on. We definitely want to thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen of the day. And, it's fantasy draft week on the Locked On Podcast Network. So make it Locked On Fantasy Football your second listen. Fantasy expert Vinny, who brings over 20 years in the NFL with expertise and unique angle to give you the moves no one else has. Get ready for your fantasy draft with Locked On Fantasy Football. So let's talk about some of these prospects who are on this list. And we're going to go a little bit more in depth on tomorrow's episode with some of the guys that really stand out. But right away, looking at this list, you see a lot of movement. I talked about some of the quarterbacks, and my eyes went straight to two guys. JT Daniels, who is now on his third team, a guy who started at USC, transferred over to Georgia, got beat out by Stetson Bennett. At some point, you're thinking, like, maybe it is you, JT Daniels, but he has another opportunity at West Virginia. We'll see what he makes of it. All right, but he's on this watch list now. And not just him, another guy who was at USC with him and actually was the reason that JT Daniels transferred from USC, but Keaton Slovis. And then next thing you know, Keaton Slovis, there's a head coaching change. Slovis says, you know what, I'm out of here, throws up the deuces, no pun intended, for USC, and heads to Pittsburgh. So a couple quarterbacks there where you're very curious to see how it plays out for them. Can they kind of reshape some of their fortunes as it pertains to this draft that's coming up? This is their last opportunity to really put things on display of who they are and what they can be. I think with Slovis, he's a guy that's he can play some football for sure. He's got to be able to stay healthy. I think that's been one of his bigger issues. But we'll kick it over to you, Rob. Is there anyone on this list where you kind of see him and you're like, you know what, that's interesting that he's on this list. I'm curious to see what he does.
There's literally hundreds of them, Croc. I mean, that's one of the things that, the Senior Bowl kind of announced there is that I think they said there's 485 players on this initial list. And then, oh, by the way, hey, seniors, this is your opportunity. If you're not on this initial list, we'll bring you in still, kind of a thing. So yeah, there's all kinds of players. But, one of the guys that I'm really intrigued by has been the Miami offensive tackle Zion Nelson. And, of course, one of the huge coaching changes that we've seen, you kind of alluded to that with the USC here just a moment ago, but is Mario Cristobal going from Oregon to Miami. Cristobal, of course, was well known for being an offensive line coach earlier in his career, including at Alabama. And I just want to see a player like Cristobal, a player like Nelson get coached up by Cristobal and then hopefully be able to carry that over to the Senior Bowl. If he has the breakout season, I think that he could. He may not need to perform at the Senior Bowl to wind up being a first round selection, because the traits are undeniable, and that's exactly the type of talent that I have seen Cristobal coax out of people in the past. I mean, Penei Sewell was just a couple of years ago, of course, and so to me, that is one of the players that's really intriguing. I'd be remiss to talk about offensive linemen when you have a guy like Jackson Kirkland, again in my own kind of proverbial backyard here at University of Washington, coming off of the injury-plagued season. He would have been a Senior Bowl player a year ago. And so to have him coming back, that's a big one. His injured teammate ZTF, the pass rusher, he is a spectacular talent as well. And so, yeah, there's an awful lot of players, Croc. When I look at that Senior Bowl list, again, my eyes kind of just pop rather than trying to focus in on any one player. That's pretty difficult for me.
Yeah. Thank you for the acronym there. I'm going to steal that because I don't want to butcher the man's name. It is what it is. We're going to talk about edges because that's, Croc, where my eyes go to as soon as this list comes out every year. We'll do that tomorrow because you bring up a good thing too. There's two Notre Dame linemen on here that I'm interested to see. One being Jarrett Patterson, a guy that I think really stands to make up some ground here this season. I'm looking forward to seeing how he can fare. I thought he popped a couple of times on film last year, and so he's one of those residual guys that really could take that step forward. And Kirkland, I think right now, I would think you would have to say he's probably the premier talent in this class, at least a guy that could have come out last season that we've seen enough on to think that he can do it. Like, I think he's got to prove it, but I think he's probably in the lead, at least as far as my mind.
I've talked about a lot of these guys that transfer. Why do you think there are so much transfers nowadays? Is it just because of the transfer portal? We know the NIL kicked in. That has kind of changed things up. But for guys that are going into their senior year, I feel like there are so many guys that are going to new spots. And now all of a sudden the spotlight's on them to be able to produce at a high level, learning a new system for a lot of these guys. Again, I talked about a couple quarterbacks, but on tomorrow's episode, I'll talk about, a safety that transferred from Arkansas to LSU, a running back that transferred from Michigan to UCLA. So why are we seeing this so much?
I think there's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, I think the pandemic is, certainly increased things as well. But I think that there is just this whole idea of immediate results. And if you have to compete for a job and you see a better avenue, then you now just have that ability to do so. I mean, and again, I'm dating myself, but I remember when you had to wait for a certain song on the radio or go buy it. Now you just download it immediately. And so I think that there's some of the players are taking advantage of the opportunity. I think coaches are taking advantage of that opportunity as well. So players, recognize that the relationship that they may have had 10, 20 years ago, where the coach would come into the family living room and really commit to that family, that I'm going to help raise your son. I think that's all kind of out the window for a lot of these players now. Is, can you help me get paid? And obviously with the different media markets that are available in bigger cities and things like that, I think you're going to continue to see a lot of the players who play in these relatively small schools. If they get an opportunity to go to a big city and market themselves in some way, then I think that they're going to have to look at those possibilities.
The transfer portal, aside from its whole self, for this group of players, when you transfer as a senior, it's a last-ditch effort to get more visibility, to try and extend your career, to get into the league, because I wonder if that's going to work out for them, because being that far along in your career and switching systems, I think, you got to have a lot of confidence in your ability to adjust to whatever the new staff is, the new scheme is. But it's a risk, and I'm not sure everybody's going to live up to it.
Yeah, curious to see how it works out for a lot of guys, especially the two guys I mentioned in particular. JT Daniels, who's now on his third university. We're going to dive into some more of those guys on tomorrow's episode. But next up, we're going to talk about a feel-good story that Rob Ring was there to experience with a certain couple Seattle Seahawks players. All right, so keep it locked right here. We're going to talk about that next. All right, Rob, you were there for a very unique situation with twins who were drafted to the same NFL team. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the guys we're talking about are Shaquille and Shakim Griffin, and we're having this conversation today on August 25th because on August 24th, Shakim Griffin retired from the NFL. He played for, a little bit more than that seasons in the league, 3 with the Seahawks, spent some time with the Miami Dolphins as well, mostly a special teamer, but at the same time, it had, I think it was 25 career sacks, was active in roughly 50 games, had some memorable moments, again, mostly on special teams. But I mentioned all these things, the fact that he is a twin, because as many know, he was born basically with a left hand that wasn't going to be able to use correctly. They wound up amputating it basically at birth, and because of that, he was the first man to ever play in the NFL, at least in documented history, with one arm. And so just a remarkable story. And, we sometimes hear stories like this and think, oh, well, it was just kind of like a Hollywood movie. He wasn't real. He wasn't a great player in college. I mean, he was a dominant player at Central Florida. I mean, people will forget just how dominant UCF was that season. They were, of course, undefeated, wound up being, one of those teams that was trying to crack the Power Five to be able to get into the playoff, and then played Alabama. I think it was in the Peach Bowl that year where they won. And I had an opportunity kind of to follow Griffin's college career because his brother, Shaquille Griffin, had been drafted in the 3rd round by the Seahawks. It was the highest that Pete Carroll and John Schneider had used in a draft pick on a defensive back since Earl Thomas. And of course, they had the Legion of Boom and all that. They were kind of known for being able to find these defensive backs, and Shaquille Griffin comes in there and is just a very good player from immediately. And everybody falls in love with the story of his brother, who also was playing at Central Florida, of course. And again, their big run, throughout the season in 2017. He has a spectacular junior. I think his junior year, I think he had 20 tackles for loss. His senior year, I think he was, if he wasn't the defensive player of the year that year, then it was the year before. I mean, absolutely terrific player. Goes to the Senior Bowl. He's absolutely terrific there as well. They use him at linebacker. They use him at corner. They use him at defensive line. I mean, everywhere that they put him, Shaquim Griffin was making plays. And I had an opportunity to kind of interview him at the Senior Bowl, just said, hey, imagine the possibility if you're able to play with your brother. He goes to the combine, of course, runs the 4.3, puts up 20 repetitions with the prosthetic arm. I mean, just absolutely unbelievable athletic ability. And then I happen to have the great honor of being working radio in Seattle at their team facility, Virginia Mason Athletic Center, when the moment that they drafted him. And it was just, there's been some spectacular moments in that room. When DK Metcalf got drafted by Seattle, people went crazy in that room. But it was almost an emotional moment when Shaquim Griffin was drafted by the Seahawks in that room. I mean, just because of how good Shaquille had already been, of the incredible story that Shaquim was and is, and then just to have him come to Seattle and have some spectacular plays for the Seahawks. It truly was, an inspirational story, and one that I am very proud to have been a part of in my own small little way.
I find it really intriguing. I was obviously seeing it from afar, but I thought the same thing, is that how unique, how special is that to be able to reunite with your brother and do something that no one's ever done before, let alone all the stuff about his physicality and the big difference in what he is as a player. But just that aspect, I don't think that there's any pair of brothers that have played in this league that wouldn't trade something to get that. I know the Kelsey brothers would love to play together. They talk about that fairly often, but I love the story, and it's been great to watch it go along. I'm not sure there was a better place than Seattle for that particular kind of emotional piece.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we know the culture that they have there in Seattle. And as someone who covers the 49ers, roots for the 49ers, I've seen Seattle and what Pete Carroll has done. And he's almost made it like, while guys are there, it's like a college fraternity type feel to it where you have the feel-good stories like those twin brothers and some of the other things that go on. I mean, you talked about DK Metcalf when he was drafted to the Seattle Seahawks, and I can't get that image out of my head of DK Metcalf and Pete Carroll taking their shirts off when DK Metcalf walked in. So, all those things are really exciting, and it is really cool to kind of hear this story about the draft pick and how it made everyone in that room feel. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On NFL Draft. We're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow about how some of the Senior Bowl prospects make us feel. All right, we definitely want to thank you for making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen. And once again, I want to tell you that, now go make Locked On Fantasy Football your second listen. Find an intellectual fantasy expert venue who brings over 20 years of NFL expertise and a unique angle to give you the moves no one else has. Get ready for your fantasy draft with Locked On Fantasy Football. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Peace.